So as some of you know, we've been trying to chase down a few issues with our steering that we've been having on our Jeep JL Wrangler. Mainly is kind of with a wobble that we have in the steering wheel, and a lot of that we've been able to take care of just by installing a brand new Rancho adjustable front track bar. However, in the process of it, we did notice that the tie rod end on our drag link where it connects to the pitman arm is totally worn out, and that certainly isn't helping anything.
You can see this space, so that is moving up and down. So that means there's some wear there.
Fortunately, we talked to our good friends over at Synergy, and they were kind enough to send us a brand new drag link, tie rod, and even a steering stabilizer relocation kit. So that's what we're going to be installing today. Looks like instructions, some stickers. Pretty beefy, feels very heavy. Some nice packaging. Cool, drag link. All right, next box. More stickers and instructions. Cool. Last box. So everything looks really nice. I'm pretty impressed with the quality. I don't know how much the factory ones weigh yet because I haven't taken them off yet, but these feel good. These feel really solid. They're really beefy. What I like about them is that they're designed to be adjusted on the vehicle once installed. You don't have to take it off every time. Tie rod's awesome. Likewise with the drag link. Nice big tie rod ends on both. Comes with all the hardware and everything looks like it's assembled. This is clearly the clamp that's going to go onto the tie rod for the steering stabilizer relocation bracket. And this looks like it is the track bar bolt that's going to be used with the steering stabilizer. Before I start anything, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I secure the steering wheel. So let me go ahead and grab strap. All right, so one of the first things that I like to do anytime I'm working with steering components is to secure the steering wheel. And what I'm going to do here is just take a rag, slip it through the steering wheel so that I don't damage anything. And take a simple strap like this. Slip it through the hole, and then the adjuster lever that's underneath the seat that you would normally pull to move the seat forward or backward. I'm just gonna strap this up to that. All right, you don't need to go crazy tight. You just basically want to make sure that the steering wheel doesn't lose its position, especially now that they don't have a steering lock. So that ought to do it. Now we can go back out and work. All right, now we can go ahead and take the wheels off. I need to grab me a 22mm socket, and I think I actually need to get the key out too, don't I? Kind of lame that we have these. I need to change out those lug nuts. All right, I'm actually warming up. I think spring is finally here. My goodness, happy for it. All right, now that we got the wheels and tires off, we can go ahead and start removing factory components. The first of which is going to be the steering stabilizer. Give some tools. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's 18. Ooh, good guess. So as you can see here, the steering stabilizer is held in place with this nut. We're going to start there. There we go. Pop that out. So now that we've got the steering stabilizer off, we can go ahead and remove the tie rod. Gonna need a 21mm socket for that. Perfect. Came right out. Let's get on the other side. Sheesh. Talk about featherweight, geez. Let's take a look at these side by side. Okay, so it's not crazy heavier. Obviously it's not a solid bar, but it's definitely more stout than the factory one. All right, now that we've got the tie rod off, we can start working on getting the drag link off. We're gonna have to install the drag link before we can do anything else. So using a 21mm socket, just like we did with the tie rod, I'm gonna go ahead and separate the drag link from the knuckle. Now comes the tricky part. So to separate the tie rod end from the pitman arm, it'd be nice if you could use something like a puller, but there's just not a whole lot of room between the top of the pitman arm and the frame of the Jeep. So we're gonna try something a little bit different. And before I can do that, I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect my sway bar so I can rotate it up and give me more access to the pitman arm. So let me go ahead and grab an 18mm wrench and socket. Gives me a little more access to the pitman arm right here. So we've got a 21 and helper wrench. So again, because the tolerances or the space in between the pitman arm itself and the frame is really tight, all I can ever really get on it is a box wrench. So I'm going to stick this on here just to help it along. All right, now that we've got the nut loosened up on the tie rod end, attaching the drag link to the pitman arm, we're going to go ahead and grab a pickle fork, get that thing separated. Need a big hammer. Which one? One of these guys will fit. As you can see, it actually looks like a fork, like a tuning fork really more than anything. And what you do is you slip it in between the joint itself and whatever you're trying to separate, pound on it, and it should separate things. But I don't know, let's get this drag link up just a bit. Just hold it in place. Here goes. There it goes. Well, not too bad. I think we spared the boot. Sheesh, this thing's really featherweight. So unlike the factory tie rod, which is kind of similar in weight to the new Synergy one, this drag link right here, the factory one, weighs nothing as much as this one right here. This is considerably beefier, at least in terms of weight, if nothing else. All right, so there's one last thing we need to do before we can install any new drag link or tie rod, and that's to remove this bolt securing the track bar in place to the front axle, because that's where the brand new Synergy steering stabilizer relocation bolt or pin is going to go. So that's what we're going to do right now. Again, using a 21mm socket. Let's go ahead and remove this. Now we can install our very first new product. It's going to be this guy right here. Some industrial strength plastic. This is where the steering stabilizer is going to get attached to. This is a longer bolt. I sure hope it's going to work with our Pro Rock 44. Let's do a quick test fit. Yep, it's going to fit. So it looks like we're going to reuse the factory flagged nut here. So this guy right here has come out. Let's get this on a little bit tighter so I don't lose it. Get a torque wrench. So we're going to go ahead and set our torque wrench to 125 foot-pounds of torque, as would be the case with any of our track bar bolts. Okay. Now I'm pretty sure I need to remove the bracket as well at this point. All these right here. I'll bet it's 13. All right, this one's going to need a box wrench. All right, now we can go ahead and start assembling things back onto our Jeep. First and foremost, the drag link. There's a very specific way that we need to set up this drag link according to Synergy. So it should be noted that there is a difference between Rubicons and non-Rubicons. Like if you have a Sport or Sahara, your front axle and rear axle are physically narrower just by a bit. So depending on what you have and what you're installing this on, you'll need to set it accordingly. So be sure to check the Synergy instructions because they're very specific on how you want to do this. Being that we have a Rubicon, obviously those are the instructions we're going to be following. So I should note before we begin, the drag link has two different sides to it. One that has no adjuster to it, just threaded in. And then on this side you have what's called a double adjuster because you have this adjuster sleeve that goes inside the drag link. This is the side that will attach to the pitman arm itself. And so what we're going to do is focus our attention here first. At least from what I've read, according to the Synergy instructions, if you have a Sport or Sahara, this tie rod end would be sucked in all the way into the drag link itself. But because we have Rubicon, we need to set that at about 1/2 inch. So I'm going to check here, and it actually looks like it's already set to 1/2 inch. So what I'm measuring is physically this edge right here to the top line of the threads. And as you can see here, you can see it's 1/2 inch. All right, so now that we have this tie rod end verified that it's set correctly, we're going to go ahead and take this whole drag link over to our Jeep. And before we do anything else, I'm going to verify that these boots, the tie rod end boots, are all the way secured in place on both ends. So you can see it's completely flush. So that's good. We're going to go ahead and take off this castle nut. So this side here, the straight side of the bar with the adjuster sleeve, we're going to go ahead and insert this into the pitman arm. And we're going to take our castle nut, just thread it on by hand. On this side, with the buckle of the drag link arm facing forward, we're going to go ahead and see if this will go in. So you can see we're still a bit off, and what we're going to do is we're going to make an adjustment to the adjuster sleeve at the pitman arm until this will actually line up. So it looks pretty good. Go ahead and put this on. So obviously we're probably going to need to make additional adjustments once everything is set to make sure that the steering wheel is straight. But for now, that's all set up. I'm going to go ahead and take a torque wrench and tighten up the castle nuts to 55 foot-pounds of torque. Let's go ahead and hand tighten them up first a little bit. Is it 22? Yeah, maybe it's 22. Using a 22 millimeter socket now, we're going to go ahead and cinch these in. Actually, I don't think I can do that on the pitman arm end because I can't get to it and use a box wrench. Only I don't think I have a 22 millimeter box wrench. If I do, it's going to be a sad testament that my tool bag is more prepared than my garage at home. $21 and $23. I don't think I have one. $24. Why don't I have a 22? All right. Hopefully we can find some tools that we need 22 millimeter box wrench at least. Closest hardware store to us is Home Depot, and so that's where we'll go first. And what a beautiful day. Hey! 22. All right, now that I've got my 22 millimeter wrench in hand, we're going to go ahead and tighten up this castle nut. Unfortunately, I can't get a ratchet on there, or let alone a torque wrench, so we're just going to do the best we can with this. Hi, Tessa. Came to help? Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit tighter, and you never really want to loosen up a castle nut to get the holes aligned for the cotter pin. You always want to go a little bit tighter. So I can see right here, this castle nut is just blocking the hole. I'm going to make it a little bit tighter. That ought to do it. I should be able to get a cotter pin right through there, and it's on pretty tight. So this is a pretty big wrench. I'm sure I got it at least to 50, 60 foot-pounds of torque. And we also have a cotter pin hole opened up, so I should be able to get that in there as well. So we'll do the same here. This one I will take a torque wrench to. Set this to 55 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, so we can see the cotter pin hole there. Almost. You can see the holes opened up. Again, you always want to tighten, never loosen. So you can see that this kit actually came with a sleeve. If we were doing a drag link flip, this is what would have been needed for that. But since we don't have a track bar relocation bracket up front yet, we won't be using that. So we've got our cotter pins here and our pinch nut bolts here. Actually, let's see what I'm going to need for that. And a 19. All right. So first and foremost, we're going to go ahead and put in the cotter pin. Okay. All right, so from here what we're going to do is make sure that the drag link arm itself is actually rotated so that this bend is pointing straight forward. And then we're going to take the hardware that's provided. These are for the pinch bolts. Slip that through. We're going to take this stover, and because of the stover we won't need any red Loctite. Install one on this side as well. Now the pinch nut and bolt are going to need to be tightened up to 90 foot-pounds of torque. All right, getting close. All right, so now that we've got the drag link completely installed and everything is exactly like it needs to be, I think we can go ahead and reinstall our sway bar. 18 millimeter socket and wrench again. All right, now we can move over to the tie rod. Bring out the factory tie rod just so that we have something to work off of. Okay. All right, so to the best of my ability, I'm going to go ahead and try to get my tie rod ends on the factory tie rod as straight as possible, and then take a measurement from point to point just to give me a rough starting point of where I should have my new Synergy tie rod set at. And then of course we'll have to do some additional adjustments once it's installed on our Jeep. But so that's where I'm going to begin. These things did come off pretty straight, so I'm not too worried about them being off. Take a measurement. About 61 1/16. So, I mean, I can already tell that we're way off over here. So according to the Synergy instructions, if you have a Sport or Sahara, this tie rod end that's inside the tie rod itself needs to be threaded out about 4 complete turns. And if you have a Rubicon, this should be 10 turns out. But I don't know where they started from or what this is representing. So I'm gonna actually wind it all the way in and then count my way back out. Okay, that's it. So from here, let's just assume that this is 0 here. So that's 1, 2, 9, and 10. Now there is a very specific dimension that you should never exceed, and I believe that's 3 inches to the base here. Let's just verify. Yep, so we're well within acceptable range. It's 10 turns out, and that's where we'll leave it. So just to help hold this tie rod end in place, I'm going to cut open my hardware package. Kind of thread that in there, because otherwise this thing's going to flop all over the place. These are going to require a 3/4 inch wrench or a 19 millimeter socket. Either way it'll work. I'm just going to tighten this up just a bit, just so that this thing doesn't flop around. And just like before, we're going to make sure that the tie rod boot is completely seated. Looks all good. And this thing looks pretty vertical. So now we're going to go on the opposite end. Help secure things as well, just a bit. Again, we were at 61 1/16 before. Double check the tie rod boot. It's completely seated, making sure this looks as vertical as possible. Get a rough estimate. Okay, we're well off. We're at like 59 5/16. So what we're gonna do is rotate out the adjuster until we get a closer length before we even try to install it. So. Okay, that's 61 even. I'm gonna go ahead and just call that acceptable for right now. But just to make sure we're not doing anything wrong, this dimension from this edge to this point right here cannot exceed 3.5. So it exceeds it. That's too much. So then this side needs to come out more, I think. So right here is 2.5. We'll go ahead and split the difference. 1, 2. This one we're at 2 7/8, so we have about an 1/8 inch to play with there. Then I should be able to bring this in. And that puts us at 3 5/16. So we have just a little bit of room to work with. But theoretically, we should be almost dead on right now, plus or minus a 1/16. So it's not like we're gonna have to make like 1/2 inch movements. I just wanted to bring this as close as possible to the factory length that we had, and then we'll have an easier time setting our toe. I should note that this slit right here, Synergy actually wants it to line up with the slit in the tie rod itself. So I'm gonna set it right there for now. Let's go over, take it to the Jeep. You're working one side at a time. We'll go ahead and take off our castle nut. Just loosely for now. Making sure that the tie rod is pointing forward, as in all the bends are facing forward and relatively flat on bottom. Take off the castle nut. Okay, so already it looks like it's pretty much on. We could probably take some initial measurements. So looking at the amount of tie rod end that's actually exposed, I wasn't really thrilled about what I was seeing, so I'm just doing a quick rudimentary check. I just measured the back of the brake rotors, and I got 65 3/4 of an inch. Up front, right here, I'm getting 66 1/4, which means we're about 1/2 inch toe out. I mean, if you're just going off the rotors. Obviously, we're gonna do more adjustments later, but just looking at this, we are way too much out. So I'm gonna go ahead and cinch this thing in about 1/2 inch. So take care of that now. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's take a new measurement. Okay, so now I'm looking at 66 even. That sounds about right. Yeah, that's 66 even, which is pretty good because once we install our wheels and tires, now we're almost ready to get our toe set in, and we just need to come in just a hair and we should be good to go. So that's actually pretty good. Front to rear on the brake rotors, dead even. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is tighten up these castle nuts, torque them to 55 foot-pounds of torque, get a cotter pin on them, tighten up all the pinch bolts. We'll get our wheels and tires on. All right. 22mm socket, just like before. Now we're going to take our torque wrench, tighten up these bolts to 55 foot-pounds of torque. Again, like before, you want to make sure that once you get to your torque setting, if the cotter pin hole isn't lined up, it's always necessary to tighten a bit more, not loosen. That ought to do it. Let's go to the other side. All right, that should do it there as well. Now you can see the whole tie rod's kind of drooping. We're going to rotate that up so that it's flat. We're going to go ahead and tighten up at least this particular pinch bolt. Still looks pretty good. So on this side, we're still going to need to make some adjustments, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and tighten it up so that things don't move. Okay, so now we need to get our wheels and tires on, and then we'll do a complete toe-in check. We'll tighten up the pinch bolts to torque specs once everything is set. Time to get the wheels back on. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do a final toe check using the tires. So I've got 68.5, maybe 16th less actually. 68 13/16. So we need to get this line in line with the back, or close to it. So it's basically 1 whole half turn is what we just did. Take another measurement. Okay, now I've got 68 9/16, 68 5/8. So that's a 1/16 of an inch toe in. I think we're good. So ideally, I mean, depending on who you're talking to, the adjustment that you want here maybe should be more than a 1/16 of an inch because these are 37-inch tires. However, according to the Synergy instructions, they want this adjuster sleeve right here. Do you see the slit? There's one on the back side of the tie rod itself. They want this in line with this. So if we got it to the point where we absolutely think is perfect, these slits would not be aligned. So I'm defaulting to the instructions, which say that that slit needs to be in line with the tie rod, which gives you the most clamping force. So 1/16 of an inch is what we're going with. Just like the drag link before, these pinch nuts need to be tightened to 90 foot-pounds of torque. Okay. Everything's tightened, everything's torqued, cotter pins are installed, toes set. Final step, got to unstrap the steering wheel. Okay, looks like the steering wheel moved a little bit. So it may be nothing, but it's entirely possible that we're going to have to recenter our steering wheel. So the steering wheel is pretty off. Before we go on our test drive, I'm going to go ahead and recenter it. So I'm going to grab a wrench. Cindy, if you wouldn't mind keeping an eye on the steering wheel. All right, 3/4 inch or 19 millimeter, that'll do. So I'm not even 100% sure which way to rotate this thing now. All right, that might be enough. We're going to take our wrench, place it on the adjuster, and we'll turn it up or down depending on what we need. So if you wouldn't mind giving it a look.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Stop.
All right, so now that we've got the steering wheel centered again, we can go ahead and install our steering stabilizer. And according to the instructions, I'm going to have to drill this hole out to 1/2 inch in order for it to fit. So, grab me some safety goggles. A little bit of cutting oil. I'm going to go ahead and remove this guy right here. So now I need to get the rest of these pieces. So now we have our clamp collar for the tie rod and the bolt to hold it in place. Hardware. And I didn't verify it. This needs to be drilled out on both ends. Yeah, so it turns out that it needs to be drilled out to 1/2 inch hole on both ends. So that's what we're going to do right now. Should be good to go now. So what we're going to do first is at least get the can side of this steering stabilizer partially installed or loosely installed onto this new mount that we have on the track bar mount on the axle. And then we're going to start the engine, turn the wheels all the way to passenger, because that would be what this would be completely collapsed. So okay, obviously I have the engine off and the steering wheel backed off just a bit, but I'm going to try to take account for that. We'll collapse the steering stabilizer completely and then back it off like 1/4 inch. And then before we tighten everything down, we'll just cycle everything through to make sure that it's good. So now we can go ahead and install this clamp. You'll notice there are 2 sets of holes on top. The smaller hole is made for the hardware provided. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that the smaller hole for this bolt is facing toward the steering stabilizer. If you do it the other way around, the dust shield will get in the way. Just get loosely on. Now we can slide this over. All right, so once again, we're just gonna want to push this all the way in first and then bring it back out just a little bit, like 1/4 inch. Get this out of the way. So ideally what we're going to try to do is tighten up this clamp so that this space on front and back are the same distance. You don't want it to pinch one way or the other. Let's switch over to a hand wrench. Okay, now we can bring down our steering stabilizer back down. And then using a 3/4 inch wrench, we're going to go ahead and tighten this bolt up. Alright, so before I go crazy tight on everything, the clamp I made on tight, but I didn't get this bolt on tight. I'm going to just cycle it back and forth and make sure that we're getting a full steer and there's no bind or any other issues. right, we just cycled our wheels back and forth. Everything looked like it checked out. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this bolt again, add some red Loctite, tighten everything up. Just a little bit. So if there were any other bolt, I would probably put some red Loctite on this teeny little one as well, this button head. But I'm afraid if I do that, it'll be a permanent fixture. So I'm just going to tighten it up the best I can. Call it a day. And there you have it. Our all new Synergy drag link, tie rod, and steering stabilizer relocation kit. Looks fantastic. I love the fact that the steering stabilizer is above the tie rod now. It won't get smashed like it did before from the factory. Everything else is super beefy. I think we're ready for the trail.